Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemel, and we're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about basically the whole range of issues of our business, professional, and financial lives. So job hunting, starting a business, wealth building, all of those topics and things related to it, like how to build effective relationships, etc. So today is our monthly Economic Echoes show, the state of capital Y-O-U-R, your economy. And it's when we take a look at the various economic factors and see what they mean in our own lives, because none of us lives at the national or lives according to the national economy per se, right? We all live in some kind of local area, and how the state of the economy of that local area varies in almost all cases from that of the entire nation. And in fact, the economy of the entire country is really the aggregate of all these local areas, right? That's how those statistics are compiled. So, how you experience inflation is different in most cases than how I do. Unemployment, all of these factors. So it's always a busy show because there's lots of data to cover. So I'm going to jump right into it. We always start out with the consumer price index, and we're going to look at the national consumer price index first, and you see that. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the CPI for all items went up 0.4% in December. Okay, and overall, year over year, these are seasonally adjusted. It rose 2.9%. I'm sorry, it rose 0.4% in December, seasonally adjusted. Year over year, it rose 2.9%, not seasonally adjusted. Now, the index for all items excluding food and energy, which tend to be the most volatile, is 3.2%. This is well above the Federal Reserve's target of 2%. And we'll see how this plays into expectations and such a little bit later on in the show. So let's drill down now. Okay. So that's funny. Okay. All right. So food went up 2.5%. Energy went down 0.5%. So let's look at food, and you can see that food at home went up 1.8%. Food away from home went up 3.6%. So restaurants in particular are raising prices now. If following the business news, there have been some bankruptcy filings in restaurants, TGI Fridays, etc. Consumers are really starting to resist paying the higher away from home food prices. I know I've essentially given up eating outside of my home. Not necessarily because of the cost, although that's a factor. A lot of it has to do with most restaurant food is not as healthy as what I can make at home. And I've been focused on improving my diet and eating very modest meals. So, okay, and then you can see in both categories, full service meals and snacks, limited service meals and snacks went up, for all intents and purposes, the same amount. For food at home, you can see that the biggest increases came from sources of protein, meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, 4.2%, and non-alcoholic beverages went up 2.3%. That's contrasted with fruits and vegetables went up only 1%. Dairy products 1.3%. Cereals and other food products 8.8%. And then other things 0.8%. So just looking at my diet, so the cost of the food I buy went up about 1%. I don't buy a lot of protein of these types of protein products. I eat a little bit of fish and some eggs each week, but that's all. Non-alcoholic beverages, I drink water. So, right. So, again, if you eat a meat heavy diet, it's likely that you experienced inflation at a higher rate than the national average because the cost of meat, poultry went up over 4%. Okay, energy went down 0.5%. Energy commodities went down almost 4%, whereas energy services went up 3.3%. So let's look at the difference between the two. So fuel oil went down over 13%. Gasoline went down 3.4%. So that's what are called energy commodities. And then going back to the other side, energy services. So electricity went up 2.8%, natural gas 4.9%. So for me, I don't drive very much. I don't use fuel oil at all. I don't drive very much. And so my experience with energy inflation is likely higher than what is the national average. And now if you live in the Northeast, where we'll go back to this so you can see this, where you rely on fuel oil for heating, and that's a sizable expense. So the fact that it went down so much could mean that you're not feeling the pinch from inflation nearly as much as the national average. Okay. All right. Now let's go back and let's look at all. Okay. So commodities, less food and energy, declined by 0.5%. I mean, essentially unchanged. All items less food and energy services went up 4.4%. Let's look at these details. Okay. So if you use tobacco products, okay, those went up 6.7%. Time to give up smoking, right? Apparel went up a little over 1%. New vehicles dropped by 0.4%, essentially unchanged. Used cars dropped by 3.3%. But if you didn't buy a car, it did, that had no impact on how you experience inflation. Okay. And this is medical care commodities, essentially unchanged. Alcoholic beverages, 1.4%. Again, a pretty modest increase. And then tobacco. So, again, as you drill down into these, you get a better feeling for how you may have experienced inflation. Now, by the way, the December increase of 0.4%, that's pretty hefty, and it has an impact on how people view inflation and how people view future expectations. Okay, so we'll stop that, and now we're going to go to consumer price index for the local area. Now I use Los Angeles. That just happens to be where I'm located, but you can obviously wherever you're located, just do a search for inflation rate and your city, and you'll get the local consumer price index. For me, that's Long Beach, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim. If you live in, Miami, or you live in rural Nebraska, it's going to be a different index, but you're gonna see essentially the same information. Okay, so area prices in Los Angeles went up 0.2% over the last month. Overall, 3.4% from a year ago. So actually, local inflation in Los Angeles was lower than the national average for last month. Okay, but overall, the inflation rate was higher. So let's look at some of the details now as we look at the local rate. I just want to make sure. Okay, yeah, want to make sure you can see it well. Okay, so food prices rose 0.3% in December. Food at home went up 0.4%. Food away from home rose by 0.2%. So interestingly, the here in California, the inflation rate for eating out was slightly lower than the inflation rate for eating at home, but not such a big variance. We would probably notice it very much. Energy, okay, decreased 1.4%. That was due to gasoline prices dropping by 1.7%, but the price for natural gas went up 5.1%, and the price for electricity was unchanged. So for me, my energy cost went up because I don't drive very much, but I do heat my house with gas, and I have a gas range for cooking. Okay, and then all other prices. Here we go. So it went up 3.3% in December. Apparel went up almost 1%, shelter 0.5%. New and used motor vehicles went up 0.3%. And these were partially offset by household furnishings and operations, which went down 2%. So all in all, the 0.3% increase in December, if we were to annualize that number, we would be at 3.6%. Now, obviously, that's not how it works. It varies month to month, but still, on a local level, significantly higher than the number that the Fed wants to see. Okay, now let's go next to. Oops, I passed it. Okay, here we go. This is the. That's interesting. Okay, so next we're going to look at current and real earnings for all employees. I only have this on a national basis. The local data doesn't get updated very often. But one of the things you'll see, real average hourly earnings declined slightly. What that means is on a buying power basis, right? Buying power went down a little bit from November to December. Okay, that was true on an hourly basis. It was true on a weekly basis. Okay, now, by the way, you'll notice that average weekly hours, average hourly earnings went up slightly. Okay, but I think average hourly earnings are not adjusted for inflation, and so that's why when you adjust for inflation, they went down slightly. And then the number of hours worked, average weekly hours, has been pretty consistent. It's been 34.3 for the last several months. It was 34.4 a year ago. So again, very, very consistent. So average weekly earnings have increased, but unfortunately, inflation has increased as well, and it offset it. So you can see in December, average hourly earnings went up 0.3%, but inflation, as we talked about a moment ago, went up 0.4%, and that's why real weekly earnings went down 0.1%. Okay, that's just, that's the impact of inflation, right? And this may very well be why, despite getting a pay raise, you still feel like you're not making any ground up, because that unless that pay raise is keeping pace with inflation, you're not. So that is the reality of economics. Okay, next, let's look at the, wait, what is this? Okay. Okay, so this is real personal income for the states. I changed this out. I used to show you this statistic unadjusted for inflation. Okay. Oh, I just noticed this is for 22 to 23. Okay, so this isn't going to be particularly relevant. This is real personal income for the state. So we'll have to look at this next month and see how that changed for from 23 to 24. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and skip this. There was no point in covering something that we talked about last year. Okay, so next, let's look at the civilian unemployment rate. Okay, and you can see that on a national basis, in general, the unemployment rate over the last 2 years has trended up, but over the period from August to December has essentially been flat at roughly 4.1 to 4.2%. Okay, so let's look at men. Okay, so the unemployment rate for men, excuse me, dropped dropped to 3.7% last month from 3.9% in November. Okay, and for women, get rid of this one so I can track women. Okay, women was at 3.8%. I think that was essentially just down slightly from 3.9% in November. So small changes in terms of men and women, and then teenagers, 12.4%. And you can see that's been a steady drop from August when it was 14.2%. Most recently, it was at 13.9. So it dropped 0.75% basically from November to December. Now, presumably that was because teenagers were hired for holiday shopping. One would expect to see this return to an upswing for January. Okay, and now let's look at demographics. Okay, so for whites, the unemployment rate dropped 0.2% in December from from 3.8% in November. Okay, for Black Americans, it went down to 6.1% from 6.4%. Okay, for Asian Americans, okay, it also went down from three. Oh no, I'm sorry, it went. Yeah, it went down to 3.5 from 3.8. Okay, and finally for Latinos, here's Latinos. Okay, so 5.1% in December from 5.3% in November. So across all demographic groups, unemployment dropped in December. That shouldn't be surprising. The holiday season, the peak of the holiday season, hiring, will typically be at its peak as well. Okay, so all right, and then now let's look at this on the state level. Nope, I don't have the state level. Okay, so let's look at the labor force participation rate. So, um, as I've talked about many times before, the unemployment rate always has to be looked at in concert with the civilian labor force participation rate, because the unemployment rate only measures unemployment among people who are actively looking for work. So if someone decides to stop looking for work, okay, that will cause the unemployment rate to drop, even though that person didn't find a job. It's just they gave up looking for a job. Okay, so labor force participation rate in December was 62.5%, and that's essentially on par with the last 3 months. So the total labor force participation rate, the overall, I should say, labor force participation rate has been flat at 62.5% from October through December. Okay, for men 20 years and older, it was at 70.2% in December, flat with November. Okay, women 20 and older, but we're going to see the same thing, 58.7 October, November, December. It's been flat, which is of course why the overall rate is flat as well. Now, for teenagers 16 and 19, the labor force participation rate went up to 35.7% from 36.3%. And at the same time, their unemployment rate went down, which means there was a lot of hiring of teenagers. Again, not unusual for December. Teenagers are a big source of part-time employment, and so it makes sense that even as their labor force participation rate increased, the unemployment rate went down because businesses are actively hiring for the holiday season. Okay, now let's look at this by demographics. So the labor force participation rate for whites stood at 62.2% in December, up just 0.1% from the previous month. For blacks, it stood at 62.4% versus, I'm going to take this one out so I can see it. Okay, versus 62 point, no, I'm sorry. Okay, so 62.4% in November, 62.4% in December. So it was flat, which makes sense. For Asian Americans, okay, in December, 64.3, 64.6 in November. So it did decrease, the labor force participation rate did decrease a little bit for Asians. And then finally for Latinos, labor force participation rate 67.5 versus 66.9. So it went up over 0.5% in December. And again, at the same time, the labor force participation rate increased. You recall, unemployment basically stayed flat. And so what that means is a lot of people found jobs. Okay. Now, it is interesting to note that Latinos have the highest labor force participation rate of any demographic. Okay, and that's just something to keep in mind. All right, now let's next go to okay, employment by industry. This is always an interesting statistic to look at, especially if you are unemployed or you're considering changing employment. This is showing you where job growth happened last month in December. Okay, so you can see the biggest growth in jobs came in private education and health. Almost 27,000 new jobs in December. Okay, and in government, about 23,500 new jobs. Okay, so went up but 0.1% for government, went up 0.3% I'm sorry, I'm giving you the wrong figure. Sorry. Okay, let's start over again. So, private education and health services, 80,000 new jobs for a 0.3% increase. Roughly 27 million people working in that sector. Government, okay, 33,000 new jobs, a 0.1% increase. 23.5 million people working in that sector. Okay, the other big gainer was retail trade. Again, makes sense because of the holidays. Okay, 43,000 new jobs, a 0.3% increase. But notice that the people who work in retail trade, about 15.7 million, is, you know, less than, I'm sorry, slightly more than half of the number that work in education and health services, and is only about 2/3 of the numbers of the people who work in government. Okay. The other big gainer was professional and business services, 28,000 new jobs, about 0.1%, and there's about 23 million jobs in those sectors. Okay, so the business services, business and professional services are similar size employers to government, and slightly smaller than healthcare. Okay, the losers, biggest loser, manufacturing, lost 13,000 jobs. Total manufacturing employment was about 13 million. By the way, there was a time about a half a century ago when manufacturing employment would have been much, much higher. Okay. In fact, we probably would have seen the reverse in terms of professional and business services and manufacturing. Okay. Also declining, wholesale trade lost 3,500 jobs. Okay. About 7 million jobs in that sector. And mining and logging lost 3,000 jobs, about 634,000 jobs in those sectors. Again, logging especially used to be a much bigger business in the United States, especially in Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. But those industries have declined significantly over the last 2 or 3 decades. And as a result, employment has as well. Okay, so now let's drill down. Where are we seeing the biggest increases in private education and healthcare services? Well, over 45,000 of the new jobs, 46,000 new jobs in healthcare, and another 23,000 in social assistance. And these are driven by government spending. So it's kind of almost like they're quasi-government jobs because it is taxpayer money that funds these increases. Okay, now let's look at government. Okay, so federal government saw 6,000 new jobs, state governments 10,000, local governments 17,000. Now, President Trump on Monday signed an executive order freezing civilian hiring by the federal government. So although we might see some increases in federal hiring for this month, current month, January, we should see that drop to, it's not going to be zero, but to near zero in the coming months, if indeed that executive order is followed. Okay, and you can see that there was actually 8,500 new people hired in the federal government. But because the Postal Service shed 3,000 jobs, that's why overall it looks less. Okay, on the state government level, both education and other areas of state government increased hiring, and I think we're going to see the same thing is true on the local level. Yet both local government education and local government excluding education, we saw increases in hiring. Okay, now business services. So across the board, we saw hiring, professional, scientific, and technical services, management of companies, administrative support, all saw, in the neighborhood of 9,000 to 10,000 new jobs. Okay, And as we look at professional, scientific, and technical services, so architectural and engineering saw big increases. So that hopefully will bode well for construction. Okay, management, scientific, and technical services also increased, as did others. The ones that decreased were legal services. Okay, so employment of attorneys and allied professionals dropping. Accounting was essentially unchanged. Specialized design services dropped. Computer systems design dropped, as did advertising and public relations. So advertising and public relations dropping, that's not necessarily a good sign, because advertising usually means businesses are gearing up to expand. Okay, and then let's go back here. Okay, so okay, that's it. Okay, and then the last one, retail trade. So where did things they would be in the sectors you would think for December? Clothing, accessories, shoes, and jewelry, big increase for the holidays. Sporting goods, musical instruments, the kind of things people give for gifts, makes sense. General merchandise retailers, again, the same thing. Whereas building material, garden equipment, and supplies decreased. Motor vehicle and parts dealers decreased slightly, right? These are especially building equipment and garden supplies. Presumably, we're not giving those kind of things as gifts. And so that's why we saw a drop there. Okay, and let's just see. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay, now, in terms of job losses, so in manufacturing, manufacturing of non-durable goods actually saw an increase of 3,000 jobs, but durable manufacturing of durable goods lost 16,000 jobs. Now, that tends to be an indicator that going forward, businesses are not as optimistic that people are going to be buying big ticket items, so-called durable goods, things like appliances and that sort of thing. So in terms of durable goods employment, you can see across all sectors except for miscellaneous, there were drops. In particular, big drops in computer and electronic products, machinery manufacturing, transportation manufacturing, furniture and related. Okay, all of them saw, pretty sizable drops. So did wood product manufacturing. Okay, actually, non-metallic mineral product manufacturing went up. They had a 100-job increase. Okay, it's effectively, no unchanged. Okay, but you can see durable goods across the board essentially dropped, which is, of course, what we see in the overall statistics. Now, wholesale trade also dropped. So agents and brokers actually increased a little bit, but merchant wholesalers of durable goods dropped and non-durable goods, which makes sense because manufacturing those areas dropped. Okay, and then mining and logging. So logging was essentially unchanged, but mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction dropped almost 3,000 jobs. Now, again, President Trump signed an executive order to, as he's been saying, drill, baby, drill. So presumably, over in the coming months, we're going to see this number turn around, and we're going to see higher employment in these sectors. But look, there's been a lot of talk that oil producers are not going to ramp up production. It's too risky to do so. But we'll see how that plays out. And you can see, by the way, across the board, there were drops in employment in terms of extraction. Okay. And then let's see. That was okay. So those are the three sectors we looked at in terms of jobs dropping. Now let's take one more look at the 12-month picture. And again, you can see hiring was really dominated by those sectors that are fueled by the government over the last year. Okay. And then after that, there was leisure and hospitality and construction. And manufacturing really took the brunt of the decline in jobs. So again, referring to President Trump's inaugural address on Monday, he seems bent on reshoring manufacturing. So presumably we will see this factor turn around in the coming months and years. Stand by to be determined, right? Okay. Now let's look at. Oops. Okay, so we're going to switch now to housing prices. Okay, and this is a new one that I haven't shown you before. So in this case, I'm looking at the California housing market, but you can do this. You can search here for any locale that you want. So you can search your own market. What this is going to show us is the median sales price for a home in California is over $800,000, an increase of 6.1% year over year. Okay. The number of homes sold was 21,434, a 16.4% increase year over year. Median days on market 45, an increase of 7%. So as home prices have gone up, the number of homes sold have gone up, but it's taken longer to sell them. Now, why would the number of homes sold go up? Even as sales prices decline? Well, let's look at some of these factors. Okay, and here we go. Okay, so California housing supply. Okay, number of homes for sale went up by almost 18%, but that still only represents a 2-year supply. Okay, so there were more homes for sale. Okay. Demand for housing, though, look at this. Homes sold above list price, 35.6, that actually decreased. Okay. Homes sold with price drops increased. And so homes sold to list price, 99.5%, actually a slight decrease. Okay. So what we're seeing here is as prices go up, here we are. Okay. Although the number of homes sold has increased, it's taken longer for them to sell. Okay. And they've sold, what's driving sales is being more moderate in negotiations. Okay. So there aren't as many homes selling above list price. More homes are having to drop a price in order to sell. Finally, and this is the important graphic I want to show you, is the migration trends. So moving to, you can see the hotter the color, the more likely people are moving there. The bluer the color, the more those are people leaving. Okay. California, 45,000 people were searching to move out of California state versus into the state. Next is New York, 26,000 more than 26,000 people were searching to move out of New York state versus into the state. So you can see the states out of which people are moving are California, Washington, North Dakota, Colorado, Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, and then Maryland and Virginia. The places they're most likely to move to: Florida, okay, the Carolinas and Tennessee, Arizona, and then to a lesser extent, Idaho and Nevada, and then and Maine, by the way. Okay, and it looks like New Jersey is up there too, interestingly enough. Probably people moving out of New York to New Jersey. It still looks like it's less expensive. Okay, one more thing to look at here. Top 10 areas people are moving from. Los Angeles, net outflow for the fourth quarter of last year, almost 30,000 people. New York, over 24,000. San Francisco, over 24,000. Seattle, Washington, almost 19. Washington, D.C., over 14,000. Chicago, 6. Philadelphia, 5. Dallas, Texas is the only red state city that lost population in the fourth quarter of last year, and Dallas, Dallas is kind of a almost like a blue state enclave in what is otherwise a very red state. Okay, Denver, Colorado, Boston, Massachusetts. These are all essentially that people are leaving. Communities where there's, frankly, not to be political, but very left of center government. Okay, where are they moving to? Well, Sacramento, interestingly enough, is the top place, which would seem a little bit strange. I suspect that it's people like going from San Francisco who are moving to Sacramento. So that's why you're seeing the Sacramento increase, even as San Francisco declines by more than 3 times what Sacramento is gaining. Other than that, the places people are moving to tend to be either red or purple states. Cape Coral, Florida, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Okay, well, actually, Salisbury, Maryland, that would be a blue state. Portland, Maine, kind of purple. Las Vegas, Sarasota, Florida, Phoenix, Nashville, Tennessee, all red state. And Hilo, Hawaii, obviously a blue state community. Okay, so what we're seeing here and what is affecting home prices is a big out-migration from California, and that's part of what you're seeing here. Now, I'm going to look at another location. Let's look at Florida. Okay, so Florida median sales price $410,000, essentially 800. Roughly half of what it is in California. Number of homes sold, 29,000, about the same number of homes sold. Median days on market, 70. As I recall, it was 45 in California. Oh, oops. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the market. That's the market overview. Okay. And yeah, that's the market overview. Okay. All right. Supply. So number of houses for sale went up 20% in Florida. Okay. Number of newly listed homes went up 6%. It's a 5-month supply. That's one of the things that's keeping prices more moderate in Florida. Okay. Demand, homes sold above list price went down 2%, roughly 2%. Homes sold with price drops went up 3%. And, sales to list price went down slightly, 96.4%. Okay. And then, okay, it's the migration trends are going to be the same. Okay. So you can see why Florida is seeing, the largest net in migration of people. It's because housing prices are a lot lower, and I know I've had a number of friends leave California to move to Florida. Okay, let's see how we're doing on time here. Yeah, we're doing well. All right, now let's look at. Okay, let's look at rents next. Yeah, we've got 3 more things to show you. Okay, so here, this is the Zillow rentals, and we can see what's happening with the rental market. Let's look at Los Angeles first. Okay, so median rent is $2,785, down slightly month over month and year over year. Okay, and you can see that the bulk of rents are in Los Angeles are in the range of about 1,700 to about 3,900. Okay, and then there's a pretty large number in the 5,000 plus. Okay, and the market temperature is cool according to Zillow. Now let's compare that to Miami, Florida. Okay, Miami, Florida, more recently, rents went up. Okay, even as year over year they went down. Okay, and interestingly enough, the range in terms of rents is pretty similar to in Los Angeles. Okay, the market though is warm in Miami versus in Los Angeles, and that has to do with the relative outflow from California, especially Los Angeles, versus the inflow to Miami. And then the other one I think I typically look at is Omaha, just to give something that's very different from either of those locations. So Omaha, Nebraska, okay, rents increased both month over month, and $48 in a market where the median rent is $1,548. That's a 3% increase month over month. Okay, and a $200 increase year over year, over a 10% increase year over year. Nonetheless, you can see that the range really goes from around 700 to about 1900. So notice that rents are much lower in a Midwestern city like Omaha, and as well notice that the market temperature is pretty cool. So that's interesting given how much rents have increased both last month and over the year. Okay, so there must be a supply constraint that is pushing rents higher. Even though even though the market remains pretty cool there. Okay, so that's the situation with rentals. Overall, it appears, especially in bigger cities, the market is fairly stable. Okay, but there are some smaller communities where it's really increasing. Okay, so let's do this, and then let's go to home price to income ratio. So this is, I think, one of the most important statistics to look at, and that is the ratio of home price to median household income. And this is looking historically from 1955 all the way to basically the end of the third quarter last year. It's essentially at an all-time high of 7.25, meaning the median home price is over 7 times the median household income. Okay, now, the last time it was even close to that high was in 2006, but you can see for most of the last 70 years, okay, it has been under 6. Okay, and then what we've been seeing since October 2020, when it first went above 6, is a pretty steady increase through 2022. It did drop off a little bit, but then went up again. So it will be interesting to see with new economic policy in Washington D.C., what that does to this ratio of home price to median household income. By the way, until around 2002, for over 40 years, the ratio was under 5. Okay, and it was around 4.5% or lower. Okay, and then in 2011, it did dip below 5 for just a little bit, right? So we are seeing unusually high ratio of home price to median income that does not bode well for especially young people who want to buy a house. Okay, now what does that mean? Okay, so this is the last thing we're going to look at, and we're going to look at a series of um, uh, basically um, this is a sort of a survey of consumers, they call it. So we're going to look at three things: the index of consumer sentiment, the current economic conditions, and the index of consumer expectations. So the index of consumer sentiment changed just a little from December to January. Okay, so but it did decline 7% year over year. So consumer sentiment is how people feel about their current situation. So how they feel today over a year ago, they feel significantly worse, but not much worse this month versus last month. Okay. Current economic conditions. Now, this is a composite of both consumer sentiment and other indicators of economic activity. So it actually went up 3.7% from December to January, even though overall for the year it went down almost 5%. So there was a bump in uh, actual current economic conditions from December to January. But for whatever reason, people aren't absorbing it. And I think it's partly reflected here in the index of consumer expectations. This is what we think, we consumers think, as to what's going to happen in the future. And I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning of the show when I talked about inflation, right? And you can see that that the index of consumer expectations went down by 4.2% month over month and almost 9% year over year. What is driving that is inflation continuing to be stubbornly higher than the Fed is saying that the Fed has as its target. People still feeling impinged by inflation, people's real earnings essentially being flat, slightly declining a month over month. All of these, so those are some of the factors. And the other factor is there's been a lot in the news about how the tariffs that President Trump has been talking about the last couple of months since he won the election. There have been all kinds of predictions that those tariffs are going to ignite inflation even more so. Now, I personally think that's a misread of the president's intention. If you know anything about Donald Trump's career, he's a guy who likes to make a lot of deals. And so he says a lot of stuff as he shapes up his negotiating position. And a lot of it doesn't necessarily happen because he ends up using that as negotiating leverage to get the best deal that he can. So I think that the idea that we're going to see a surge of inflation because of tariffs, unlikely to happen. Okay, countries are going to negotiate. China is in a weak financial position, so they're going to have to. Well, I shouldn't say they're going to have to, but they would be smart to negotiate on a number of these issues, lest their economy get even worse. Okay, same with Canada, same with Mexico. Their economies are not fantastic, but they're not as bad as China. But there's likely to be a new administration in Canada. The the Liberal government is almost for sure going to fall, and the Conservatives are going to take over. I listened to an interview of the of the man who is likely to be the prime minister in Canada very soon. I've gone up on his name, but I think he's open to negotiating with the United States to better work together to increase living standards for both Americans and Canadians. So I understand why Americans are pessimistic about the future, but I think this is partially media driven, and that's why I do this show, is to help us look, beyond what the media is telling us, and really look at the data and how it's likely to actually affect us as individuals. So all of these links plus others will be in the show notes. If you want to review anything, if you want to look at some of the other economic indicators, I have a link in there where you can look at average housing costs by city, by state, if you're interested in that. Some other things that you can look at. And I encourage you to spend at least about 15 or 20 minutes just looking at inflation in your locality, looking at home prices in your locality, and breaking that down. Look at how your industry is trending in terms of job growth or not, because that may give you some sense of what your what future prospects are, and what you may be wanting to do in terms of professional training and that sort of thing, to make sure that that you continue to have a viable economic life going forward. So with that, we're coming up on almost an hour. I try and keep the show to an hour. There's a lot of data. Just real quickly, going to respond to a message I got here. Okay, so thank you very much, as always, for joining me, especially those of you who are watching live. Always nice to have you here. I think we've had a good start to the new year. Looking forward to continuing with this. And if you have any questions, comments, please, my links to my social media will be in the show notes. Feel free to share those. Something personal, you can always email me. And I haven't mentioned this in a while, but if you are not a subscriber to my YouTube channel, I really would love it if you would subscribe. There is no cost, of course, and that way you'll get notified every time a new show is going live, and you'll never miss an episode of the Way to Wow shows. And it would be really a pleasure to have you among my subscribers. So thank you for considering that. And this wraps it up for the week. So I will wish you both a wonderful rest of the day, as well as a terrific rest of the week. Look forward to seeing you next week, Monday, 10 a.m., Trust and Estates Weekly. Tuesday, 10 a.m. These are all Pacific time, business lessons from the military. A week from today, Wednesday at 10 a.m., the next edition of People Making Money. And then next week on Thursday at 5 p.m. is my every other week show, Jiggers' Place. Again, 5 p.m. We'll have a cocktail and talk about the next big subject. And let's see, what's on the calendar for that. Yes. So cocktails, yes, cocktails and great books. I'm going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite books, Ivanhoe. It's also a terrific, terrific movie. I've been focusing more on, in my reading for fun, on adventure stories as opposed to detective stories. And so we'll sit back and we'll have a cocktail and go back to the time when knights stalked the domains of England. So I hope you'll join me for that. So again, thanks so much for joining me. Wishing you again a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friend.